Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We see still some people are tuning in. However, we do have quite a packed agenda, so let's already kick off this side event to the OECD Garment Forum. We are here to present you with the findings of our research project on the impact of European circular textile policies on trade partners. This is a joint initiative by Circle Economy, Chatham House and EEB and funded by Laudes Foundation and the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. I hope I said it all, BMZ. I'm just here for the housekeeping. So my intervention will be very short. Just a reminder that this session is recorded. Unfortunately, there is no time for a live Q&A, but feel free to leave questions on the chat and we will try to answer them as much as possible. However, our experience is this is a very crowded webinar. We are very happy with the amount of participants, so we will try our best to answer to all the questions, but unfortunately there are no guarantees. And I would like to pass it on to the funders of this study, BMZ and Laudes Foundation. So over to you, Jizzy.
Hello, everyone. I'm very honored to welcome you all here today. My name is Gesine Schmidt-Krosser. I work for the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, or in short, BMZ. So together with the Laudes Foundation, whom you will meet in a minute, we funded the research that will be presented and discussed today. So let me just quickly tell you why we feel this topic is so important. As BMZ, we do support the EU Green Deal and the underlying EU textile strategy because we believe they can be real game changers and they provide a framework for a textile industry that is moving towards more sustainability and circularity. But building a circular ecosystem for textile supply chains requires collaboration across national and international levels to enable more circular production and consumption. And we all know textiles are often produced without the outside of the EU. They're worn within the EU and exported beyond the EU after their use. So this makes textile supply chains inherently global. And for those circularity efforts to be truly impactful, they need to be addressed on a global scale. So we want to support industry transformation, but we know this can only happen if all critical stakeholders, including the trading partners outside the EU, are involved. So with the study presented today, we aim to highlight the impacts of EU circular textile policies on the trading partners and to begin a discussion on how these policies can be designed with the information that is needed to make them more practical and effective. And now, before handing over, I'd just like to thank our partners who conducted this very important research. Thank you very much, Circle Economy Foundation, Chatham House, and the European Environmental Bureau for your excellent work. And also special thanks to our partners, Bill from Bangladesh and Our Foundation from Ghana, whose local expertise was invaluable to our research. So now I want to hand over to my colleague from the Laudes Foundation, and I wish you all a very insightful and productive discussion, and hopefully seeing some of you in Paris these days. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gesine. And hi, everyone. My name is Amol Mehra. I lead the programs at Laudes Foundation. We're a foundation dedicated to accelerating the transition to a green, fair, and inclusive economy using industries and working with industries as a lever of change. The fashion sector is a critical lever of change that we see in the global economy and can really drive a just transition across countries and across economies. As Gesine rightfully said, we can't have a just transition without the voices and inclusion of those that are so often left out of the story. This includes suppliers as well as workers and communities. So today's event really situates the conversation around EU policy and the policy architecture around the inclusion and perspectives of those, as I mentioned, who are often ignored from these types of conversations, including suppliers. So I'm really grateful to be here with our brilliant partners, Circle Economy, Chatham House, the EEB, the European Environmental Bureau, Our Foundation, and Build. And we're going to zoom in today on what EU policies on textiles might mean for countries where textiles are so critically important to their economies, Bangladesh and Ghana. We're going to unpack questions like what risks and opportunities may exist for producers, for workers, for suppliers and communities. And then we'll hear a bit more deep dives on these two contexts. All of this hopefully helps inform stronger and more just policy making across the economies, across Europe as well. So before we go to our incredible panelists to share their insights, we're going to ask you some questions. So I'm going to ask that you grab your phones and take a screenshot of this Mentimeter link. I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. And I can see that we have about 220 of you. Great. So where are you currently working from? Good to see some distribution there. European representation seems to be more prominent. Again, this is helpful for us because, as you know, the panel discussion today is about lifting the sort of voices of some of these other regions in the discussion in Europe as well. Let's give it one more second, and then we'll turn to the next question. All right, there we go. Seems pretty dominant. Let's go to the next question, and this one is to see your knowledge of the context. The question for us today is, what proportion of Bangladesh's exports are ready-made garments? You have some options there. Let's see what people are thinking. Okay, we see a lot in that sort of maybe 60 to 80% range. In fact, there we go. Okay, so some spread in how people see the proportion of markets. Interestingly and importantly, the RMG sector compromises about 85% of Bangladesh's exports. So what that is a significant sector of the global economy. In 2022, Bangladesh exported 23 billion worth of garments to the EU, making it only the second largest supplier after China. The textile industry in Bangladesh employs on average about 4.6 million people, and the workforce is quite young. About 70% of the workforce is under 29 years old. So really important opportunity there to lift a just transition that centers agency, inclusion, and accountability for workers and also for youth. Also with a strong gender component here, the workforce is estimated to be between 58 and 80% women. Let's go to the next question, please. Ghana now. As we traipse around the world, Ghana is one of the world's top exporters of post-consumer clothing. How many tons of post-consumer textiles arrive in Ghana each year? This one has a bit of a trick question. So let's see if people get that. Okay, people are saying the 150,000 tons answer, and that is correct. Globally, over 150 tons of secondhand clothes are imported. But importantly, from the EU alone, 30,000 tons are imported. Great. Well done, folks, for taking that answer. So there you can see the statistics. There are 2017, over 530,000 people were employed in the sector, and the Continental market in Accra employs around 30,000 people. Our colleagues at the Laudes Foundation have been addressing a tragedy that just befell the market there. They'll be detailing their steps and how they're looking to help rebuild some of that employment there as well. So folks, this is what you see and about the critical nature of these two countries and how they play a role in the fashion ecosystem. And I think it's important for you all and for us all to understand why EU perspectives must include those of countries like Bangladesh and Ghana, as well as many others where suppliers exist. And this is why today we're really proud to be working alongside GIZ, BMZ in supporting this important research. And I'm proud to pass the floor over to Morgan from Circle Economy, who will take us through some of the first presentations. Thank you all very much for your attendance today. Looking forward to the dialogue.
Thank you so much for your amazing presentation and for taking us through the Mentimeter. Just give me 1 second as I pull up our presentation again and take you through the policy context of our study. So our partners at the European Environmental Bureau couldn't be here today, and it's really a shame, and I hope, Emily, you're online and listening to us somewhere. But let me take you through the scope of the policies that we looked at as part of this research. So you'll know the centerpiece of the European Union's textile strategy is the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, ESPR, which came into force last July. And this new law sets a framework for establishing specific minimum performance and information requirements for placing priority products on the EU market, including textiles. So the work on setting the rules for apparel textiles is currently underway, and upstream trading partners will be affected by the final rules, which will be adopted very promptly in delegated acts in 2026, on product aspects such as physical durability and recycled content thresholds. More information disclosure will be required through a digital product passport, and there will be a specific focus on tracing substances of concern. The digital product passport is being developed in tandem with a revision of the textile labeling regulation, which will see an update of the rules governing the providing of information on a textile product's fiber composition. So the law could see this information broadened out to include mandatory provision of the product's country of origin, which is currently not mandatory. Also, a new directive on the substantiation of green claims aims to clear the market of unreliable and confusing green marketing by setting clear rules on which methodologies can be used to underpin green claims. So while much of these approaches stick to looking at information disclosure and the product design, there are also some initiatives which seek to affect the broader economic environment in which these products are sold, notably a ban on the destruction of unsold textile products, and a new Commission initiative published last week that looks into increased market surveillance on low-value imports from large e-commerce platforms. So for downstream trading partners who receive large amounts of exports of used textiles from the EU, there are several developments at the EU level in terms of its waste framework, which will have an impact. Firstly, the increased rates of separate collection. This is an obligation established under the Waste Framework Directive, which could lead to an increase in exports of discarded textiles. And this is an implementation since the 1st of January this year. New extended producer responsibility schemes, EPR, are being designed, and the details around the fee structure and how these schemes will be governed will be set in an agreement to be adopted likely on the 19th of February. But there are currently no provisions to allow the transfer of EPR fees to support regions heavily impacted by used textile exports from the EU. And this is maybe something that we will touch on later in this presentation with our guest speakers. The EU will also set criteria defining when a used textile article can be considered suitable for reuse, and defining when the raw materials obtained after a textile recycling process are suitable to be considered a secondary raw material. So how to define what is textile waste will continue to be a key issue, and France, Denmark, and Sweden have called for stricter controls on exports of textiles. Lastly, it's important to highlight that a Commission omnibus proposal is expected on 26th of February, which could significantly roll back reporting obligations for businesses under previously established corporate sustainability laws, the EU taxonomy, and the corporate sustainability due diligence and reporting directives. This situation brings further uncertainty for companies and risks to the potential social and environmental gains from such measures. So this is the policy context that we are looking at in the scope of this research. And now I'd like to take you through the trade scenarios that have been developed by our partners at Chatham House all throughout this research. I see, Bauke, you have your hand up. Is that a mistake, or is that supposed to happen? Well, I guess it was a mistake. I'm sure everything is fine. So, and you can all hear me. So looking at the trade scenarios, after delivering a circular textiles policy review, the second phase of our research focused on designing trade policy scenarios in order to see how these policies that we've just looked at were likely to impact the flow of textiles coming in and out of the European Union. So this kind of foresight exercise faces limitations and knowledge gaps, all of which are detailed in our reports. And it's really clear to stress here that all of our assumptions have been developed under the general belief that a volume and value problem in the value chain is likely to persist. So with no absolute reductions in production or consumption, efforts like these of setting up EPR schemes may be limited. Our first assumption is therefore that despite a vast array of secular policies, textile consumption will continue to grow. The second is that there will be a time lag in the industrial sector's capacity to recycle enough textiles to input the volume of recycled content that is needed to feed back into the value chain. So the way textiles are made will take some time to adapt, and there will be some time before ESPR compliant textiles actually dominate the market in the EU. Finally, our third assumption in this analysis is that an ongoing low-value used textiles will continue to be exported outside of the EU, particularly with the formal introduction of separate textile collection in the EU this year. The restrictions to the export of waste, including textile waste, from the revised waste regulation will not stop this. So what do these scenarios look like? Our partners at Chatham House studied 3 key evolutions: short, medium, and long term. And just as a prelude to the language we're using here, it's a bit technical, but important to stress that when we talk about low and high quality textiles, in the case of this research, we're talking about ESPR compliant or not compliant textiles. And for low and high quality post-consumer textiles, we were referring to grading systems which are used in some sorting centers in Europe, grade A to D, A being higher and D being lower quality. So if we're looking just at imports and really the imports of textiles inside the EU and possible trade flow evolutions in the short, medium, and long term. So in the short term, we foresee an initial steady increase in imports of low quality textiles and a continuous static import in high quality textiles in the short term. And this is largely as a consequence of the policy package being rolled out and ESPR requirements taking some time to be fully effective in the way textiles are designed. In the medium term, we foresee a steady decrease of low-quality textile imports as the ESPR rolls in, and therefore an increase in higher quality textiles imports enters the European market. It's only in the long term, over 10 years, that we really foresee a rapid decrease of low-quality textiles entering the EU market. So all to say, the dominant fast fashion norm is unlikely to be significantly altered in the short to medium term. As concerns the export of second-hand post-consumer use textiles outside of the EU, in the short term, we foresee a continued rapid increase of both low-quality and high-quality post-consumer textiles being exported to importing countries in the global south as separate textile collection combined with EPR schemes is rolled out and lead to rapid accumulation of used stock. For high-quality textiles, which retain the highest value in a range of cycle applications from reuse to recycling, it's expected that there will be ultimately a steady decrease in exports as a circular economy in Europe for textiles develops, with more support and opportunities for reuse, repair, and even recycling. For low-quality textiles, we only foresee exports with slightly decrease in the medium term before plateauing in the long term, as regulatory loopholes will continue to exist and economically viable options for recycling and downcycling low-quality post-consumer solutions will remain challenging. So even in the most optimistic scenario where fast fashion becomes out of fashion, we only foresee that these exports will plateau. And finally, with the entry into force of the ban on the destruction of unsold goods, which includes textiles, the export of unsold textiles are likely to continue increasing in the short and medium term as supply chains adapt and companies find new solutions for excess production. And we only expect to see a steady decrease in export after 10 years. So after Chatham House's exploration of these trade flow scenarios at Circular Economy, our next step was to examine in some more detail what are the potential socioeconomic impacts of such scenarios for trading partners Bangladesh and Ghana. So in other words, what is the consequence of upstream and downstream textile trade flows remaining fairly stable and unaltered in the near future for 2 countries that are primary trading partner countries with the EU? So for this, I will give the floor to my dear colleague Sarsha, who will take us through some of these potential socioeconomic impacts.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Yes, as Morgan said, so many of these potential impacts will relate to ongoing socioeconomic realities. So some of this context might be very familiar to those of you who work in these contexts, just as a top line. The first risk to mention with relation to Bangladesh is in terms of business, and it is possible that the circular textiles policies will affect Bangladesh businesses' ability to access EU markets. So more broadly, this relates to the possibility that strict environmental standards and certification requirements from higher income global north countries and trade blocs, including the EU, may act as non-tariff trade barriers, which disproportionately affect global south countries, including Bangladesh, by restricting access to markets. The role of environmental policy and circular economy in particular in this dynamic is an ongoing debate, but a relevant context to mention. Furthermore, this could be influenced by Bangladesh's designated status as a least developed country, which is anticipated to no longer be a designation from 2026. So this is a kind of key context to keep track of. Additionally, the second major impact to highlight is that circular production costs, like sustainable production costs more broadly, is likely to be more expensive for suppliers, for factories. And the ripple effects that come with this are likely to most significantly affect the most marginalized workers. So as recycled content and durability and other product level requirements under ESPR come into force, alongside traceability requirements and data requirements associated with the DPP and the CSDDD, this will just involve a huge amount of additional capacity for factories, which threatens not only business viability, but also enforcement of workers' rights and living wage, etc., which we know are already risks within the production context of Bangladesh. Finally, with respect to Bangladesh and circularity, it is really important to highlight informal workers and the effect of circularity on the jute sector. So circular economy policies in general and related production and trends increase the demand for secondary resources or waste as a resource. This leads to heightened competition for these materials. In the case of Bangladesh, the key resource of interest is post-industrial waste. So Bangladesh does not import post-consumer textiles, therefore recycled content is likely to be the demand for recycled content is going to come from this post-industrial waste economy. Currently, this material is predominantly handled by informal workers who already experience socio-political disadvantages and marginalization, as well as hazardous working conditions. Against this backdrop, there are claims and possibilities and opportunities that circular economy agendas and policies may help the informal jute workers by formalizing the sector. Under certain terms and conditions, this formalization process may improve these workers' visibility alongside better enforcement of their rights. However, there's also a significant risk that such integration or formalization may occur on unequal terms, reinforcing their vulnerability or even contributing to new ones. So any transition to a formalized jute sector or formalized waste economy more broadly needs to be carefully planned in close collaboration with impacted workers and communities. If we move now to Ghana, in the interest of time, I apologize, I know I'm speaking very quickly. The first impact is quite kind of obvious, perhaps. It relates to income instability and job insecurity, which would result from any unpredictable or abrupt declines in the textile stream being imported to Ghana. So we saw those volumes, we saw the size of the workforce involved with that economy. And this happening in any kind of drastic way would have catastrophic consequences for the livelihoods of up to 500,000 people. Relatedly, a surge in the poor quality used textiles stream would be particularly worrying. So as Morgan said, as Europe develops its own circular economy capacity, we anticipate that it will retain higher quality reused textiles, but also higher quality recyclable textiles. The reduction of this higher quality post-consumer stream being sent to countries including Ghana would exacerbate existing environmental and socioeconomic strains as the low quality textiles increased as a proportion of the overall incoming volumes. The next impact to highlight is that the current EU policy suite does not challenge the fundamental structures which dictate the distribution of benefits and harms within the overall production, consumption, and discard of textiles. So kind of we mapped out a few of those potential increase, decrease, and plateaus, but that fundamental overarching structure is likely to remain quite familiar for the next short, medium, and long term. Of particular concern in the case of Ghana is this issue of the Waste Framework Directive. So while it introduces a mandatory extended producer responsibility policy, the EU policy currently lacks any clear intention or mechanism to send the fees paid by producers to downstream trade partner countries, including Ghana. So therefore, this policy, we anticipate, will unfortunately, in its current version, fail to appropriately redistribute the financial burden of managing textiles waste. Finally, once again, this research has highlighted both that the secondhand textiles economy in Kantamanto market, it's innovative, it's highly efficient, it is circular, but it is also characterized by informal and precarious working conditions, as well as a void of social protections, again, as kind of glaringly revealed by incidents like this fire, which Branson will elaborate on shortly. So this kind of glaring ongoing social protection gap is not likely, or is almost definitely not going to be addressed by the EU circular policy suite in its current form. So for example, the CSDDD lacks any downstream scope within its current remit. So unfortunately, this general dynamic, these patterns we have become familiar with during the course of this research, are likely to remain in place within the current status quo. I'm going to wrap it up there and pass it back to Morgan.
Thank you so much, Sasha. So we are about half an hour to go before the closure of our webinar, and we really want to give all the due time that is needed to our two guest speakers. So I'm just going to wrap up with some of the two key recommendations we had for EU policymakers specifically before handing it over to our two guest speakers. So really the first recommendation is that we see that this is a world of increased turmoil and power play. And our first recommendation is for the EU to recognize the strategic benefits of working closely with third-party trade partners. The textile value chain, as we said at the start of the webinar, is very global and interdependent, and policies made in the EU have to reflect this reality. So this means policy dialogue, meaningful forms of consultation and inclusion inside policy design, and a dual mutual learning approach, which is not limited to technology transfer from the EU to its trading partners in the global south, namely. And at Circular Economy, alongside our partners, we'll continue to deepen our research on how circular economy policies can be designed with a just and inclusive approach in mind. The second and third recommendation is far more tied to the workers and the businesses themselves operating in these countries. So the second recommendation is to protect and support workers throughout this transition inside and outside of the European Union. So key improvements in the way textiles are being produced have to go hand in hand with improved working conditions for workers in the value chain, most of whom are situated outside the EU, specifically for the textile value chain. And so this means ensuring that the CSDDD, which is groundbreaking in its scope and intent, is successfully implemented alongside key circular economy tech such as ESPR. Providing technical support for remediation is specifically a crucial way in which the EU can remain involved and ensure that the text work fully in effect. And in the same way, the EU should help small and medium-sized businesses operating in the textile value chain outside the EU help them meet these new requirements. So it will undoubtedly take time to adjust to these new requirements of legislation as a small and medium-sized business. And investing in training is essential to ensure that these businesses are not pushed out of the trade and that brands do not easily switch to businesses that have the means and resources to adapt quickly. And we've seen that several donor agencies in the EU have already implemented training, and these must continue, and these efforts must be scaled, particularly as corresponds to implementing digital product passport initiatives in these countries. So with that, I will be happy to pass the floor to two of our amazing guest speakers. We're so glad that they joined us today. So starting with the All Foundation, we're very lucky to have Branson, one of the co-founders of the All Foundation, join us alongside Solomon Noy from the Accra Metropolitan Assembly. So thank you so much to both of you for being here. I will let you now take us through the slides you prepared and some of the key messages you'd like to share with us today.
All right, thank you, Morgan and team. I'm really grateful to be here presenting on this report from sunny Accra. especially alongside Engineer Noy from the AMA, to provide together a firsthand example of why the findings of this report are so critical to bring forward into both policy and, most importantly, action. What I'd ask if we can, thank you very much. What I'd ask for those of you who haven't been able to visit Continental Market in Accra, which is by all accounts the largest secondhand clothing market in the world, is that you can imagine for a moment the local secondhand clothing infrastructures wherever you may be from. I've seen some 70+% of you attending the call today are in Europe, and you might have seen collection bins around town, or perhaps there are warehouses, perhaps there are basements under thrift stores where teams of people are steaming and ironing garments, removing, pilling, patching holes, whatever it takes to put a garment back into reuse. This is the same supply chain that sees millions of globally sourced garments on a weekly basis passing through Ghana's capital. It's one of the largest destinations of secondhand clothing in the world. Now, the policy conversations, as the Circle Economy team have introduced so well, at this very moment are investigating how to support the infrastructure and operations in major sending countries, particularly the EU, where clothes are collected and sorted for reuse. Because reuse is seen as a pillar of the circular economy and must be supported in order to help transition one of the world's most polluting industries toward a business model that can sit within planetary boundaries. Building on the conclusions of this report so eloquently presented, those same EPR policies, extended producer responsibility programs, and the multitude of policy frameworks must extend their support following the flow of clothing through the secondhand clothing supply chain beyond borders and into the communities of the informal sector driving global reuse. When the vast majority of clothing collected and sorted for reuse is exported outside of EU borders, a scenario that, as you have heard earlier in this session, is unlikely to change for many years to come. This is ever more important to ensure the current externalities experienced here in Accra do not lead to a collapse of the vital reuse economy in Ghana and other receiving countries, or do not lead to what I would argue would be a miscalibrated policy intervention, such as an outright ban on the secondhand clothing trade that could undermine the very intention of promoting circularity and reuse as a pillar of sustainability for the future of the trillion-dollar global fashion industry. So if we move to the next slide, please, we can look at how beyond the debt incurred by secondhand retailers to purchase secondhand clothing bales, in which retailers often find the majority of material to hold less value than the per bale garment cost, there are two unfolding crises here that in no uncertain terms are actually supply chain disasters, requiring intervention from first-hand fashion brands, secondhand exporters, importers, and regulators across the supply chain. This image might, for a moment, seem quite romantic. A young, strong African woman carrying her baby and a load on her head as a female small business owner in the textile transportation sector. The truth is far from romantic. If we look a little bit deeper on the next slide, we see that she is suffering irreparable harm to her spine from the compression of a 55-kilogram bale of secondhand clothing. Now, we have x-rayed hundreds of young women like her working in what is known locally as the kayeye trade, which is a term that means she who carries the burden. Indeed, she is literally carrying the burden of excess of an entire industry, and it has destroyed the discs in her spine, fused her vertebrae together, caused bone tips to press into her esophagus, and in the worst of cases can cause internal decapitation. This work is seen as necessary due to the underinvestment in secondhand market infrastructure, where despite performing a vital service of recirculating millions of garments every week for a global fashion industry worth nearly immeasurable amounts of money, 1,000 young women, like who you see on this screen, head carry secondhand clothing bales through the aisleways that are too narrow and unstable to move carts. So if we go to the next slide, we can see where this underinvestment has led to regular fires in the market. The most recent fire outbreak on New Year's Day, just over a month ago, saw the complete destruction of around 60% of the market. More than 10,000 people saw their livelihoods literally go up in smoke. At least 2 people died as a result of the fire. Our medical team at the Laudes Foundation has treated over 500 people since the fire, mostly with concerns of smoke inhalation. And there is no way to look at this other than as a supply chain disaster. Just as we at the OR Foundation have launched the largest apprenticeship program in the country to help transition young women out of dangerous head carrying, just as we are distributing emergency relief to all of the 10,000 impacted individuals and working with market leadership, the Ghana National Fire Service, the Accra Metropolitan Assembly, to improve basic fire safety mechanisms with the support of philanthropic donations alongside a voluntary EPR program, of which the OR Foundation is the first recipient, I'd ask that each of you on this call, whether you work for a brand, a municipality, a clothing store, an exporter, or are just curious about the state of the industry, I'd ask that in this critical moment, when many of the final decisions are being made on these policies that are rolling out, we need to rise to the occasion by ensuring that extended producer responsibility is in fact globally accountable to ensure communities like Kantamanto can build resilient systems to prevent disasters like this from occurring, and to build circular infrastructure wherever the close of a global industry end up. Now, I'll hand the floor or screen, as it were, to Engineer Solomon Noy from the Accra Metropolitan Assembly to speak to how support for infrastructure and waste management operations is necessary on a municipal scale, extending beyond the walls of Kantamanto Market to Accra's once pristine beaches and lagoons.
Thank you very much, Branson, and afternoon to you all. Yes, so rightly, you will notice that no matter how many times you reuse a textile or a fabric, definitely it must come to its end of life. And as the trade goes on in Kantamanto, we have upcyclers and those innovators who are able to cut and trim particular fabrics and turn them into other fabrics, leaving the residues or the trimmings behind. And as a city, that by the laws of the country, it is our responsibility to manage all types of waste, ranging from municipal to commercial to industrial waste. Everything is on our head. One thing significant is that this textile waste, which is an outlier outside the main waste generation rate of the city, is posing a lot of challenge to our infrastructure. The only infrastructure we have to manage municipal solid waste is the landfill site. And this textile waste, as they've come to their end of life, does two things. It chokes or fills the void spaces of the landfill in an exponential rate. And so together, we, in close collaboration with the OR Foundation, what we are doing currently, what we call separate collection of the textile waste every blessed day within the Kantamanto market. And this waste, we do not send them to the usual place where we send the municipal solid waste. What we intend to do to close the loop on circularity for textile waste is to look at the infrastructure or treatment technology for the cotton fabrics and the likes that can go into fiber to fiber, where these fibers will be turned back into yarns to go into the local production of our textile clothing, and that is it. But the most difficult one is the synthetic fabrics made of polyesters, polyamines, etc., that are very, very difficult to turn into fiber. So what we are looking at infrastructure or technology that will turn them from fiber to boards or fiber to any other forms that has been experimented by OR Foundation and other labs. Once it passes the engineering standards from the Ghana Standards Authority, then it will be replacing or serve as substitutes for building materials, and then pavement blocks for the road construction or alleyway pavement block road designs. So yes, in all this, the operational expenditure to be able to manage such massive, what we call turnaround of the textile waste in order not for them to end up at the landfill is very, very key and crucial. And how do we get this sustained? Through EPR schemes then we will be able to identify around the world who are the best who has the best expertise in such technologies to turn the fibers or the fabrics into other vital products that will close in the loop, and then will not end up choking our lands. Because Accra is, as those of you who have been to Accra, everywhere is built up, and there's no extra space anywhere within the city that can be used as a dump site or a landfill site anymore going. So the expenditure on cost of transportation is very huge. And therefore, we have to find a smaller footprint, smaller spaces to set up these industrial enclaves to be able to manage this separate collection of textiles. Otherwise, currently what we are doing is we are just stockpiling them, and it may end up at the dump sites anyway. And once they are not engineered, definitely the residuals will find its way back into the oceans. And then the very thing that we wanted to prevent by a separate collection of discarded fabrics within the Katamanto market, we will end up going back into the ocean, and that will have a very rippling effect on aquatic life. As we can see, like I've been saying, the lifespan of some species of turtles are getting extinct because their place of habitat, which is the shoreline, the beachfronts, are all getting choked and calcified with textile waste. And because of that, they could no longer scoop the sand to deposit their eggs. Aside the microfibers that enter the ocean to go into the food web or the food chain, that in turn comes back for us as we consume the fishes, and then we are getting very damaging health effects, including sterility, but it remains to be proven. Works are extensively going on. So this is where we need the extended producer responsibility to be able to fill in the gap of setting up the infrastructure as well as operational expenditure to manage this infrastructure in order not to leave the loop open. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to both of you. And I think it's quite clear from your intervention, and also from what we heard before, that the current EU policy package for circular textiles, as it stands, is not sufficient in helping tackle and address some of the main and incredibly saddening challenges that you are facing in Ghana and in Accra specifically. So thank you so much for taking the time to show us this. And yeah, it was very raw, and I think, yeah, something that maybe people need to hear more often. I will be passing the floor now to our second guest speaker from Bangladesh, Abdul Razak from Recycle Raw. He will be giving us another small intervention to give us his perspective on what's been presented today and how EU policymakers and the EU community in general can support the transition to more circular textiles in Bangladesh.
Thank you, Morgan. This is Abdul Razak from Recycle Raw. I'm really happy to be here as a speaker. This is a really amazing session. And due to time constraint, I will try my level best to cover up my question answer. The report actually, based on Bangladesh situation, this is kind of reflection of my expectation. It was really a fantastic report, but still Bangladesh requires some sort of support especially from EU and brand side. If I say, like, invest in recycling infrastructure and innovation, the EU and brands can provide funding and technical support for setting up advanced textile recycling facilities in Bangladesh, supporting innovation in fiber-to-fiber recycling, like chemical recycling for polyester or mechanical recycling for cotton, can make circularity more viable. Bangladesh mostly handling waste, but there is almost no chemical recyclers. There is no formal chemical recyclers, and also mechanical recycling has a lot of technical barriers here. And also, like policy label and regulatory framework, the EU can push for the trade agreements that reward sustainable production, such as tariff reductions for garments made from recycled materials. That would be really a fantastic element to push the circularity forward. Brands can work with policymakers in Bangladesh to ensure clear guidelines and incentives for circular practices. And also one more important, guarantee demand and market access. Many manufacturers hesitate to invest in circularity due to uncertain demand. If major European brands commit to sourcing a percentage of their garment from recycled and repurposed materials in Bangladesh, it would create market stability, and that will really helpful to increase the percentage of circularity. Setting up long-term contracts with suppliers who invest in circularity can de-risk their transition. And also capacity building and knowledge transfer. Bangladesh mainly is a production hub, but major innovation and also research normally done in EU and also other countries, US. So the EU and brands can fund skill development programs for workers and factory managers on circular economy principles, and partnering with universities and also research institutes to drive innovation in sustainable textile would create. But still, I found some mismatch between global circularity goals and local realities in Bangladesh here. The EU and brands often set sustainability targets without considering Bangladesh infrastructure's gap, energy constraints, and financial limitations. There's an assumption that regulations from Europe, like use extended producer responsibility, can be easily adopted in Bangladesh, but local supply chains are not always ready for strict compliance. Overfocus on recycling instead of waste prevention, I would say, is another constraint. Brands and policymakers emphasize textiles recycling, but often overlook waste prevention strategies such as design for durability, reuse, and also repair. Bangladeshi textile sector could benefit from incentives to redesign products for longer life cycles rather than just improving recycling capacity. And also limited integration of informal waste workers. We already get to know from the report that a significant portion of Bangladesh textile waste is handled by informal workers who collect, sort, and resell materials. These workers are often excluded from formal circular economy strategies despite their expertise and role in waste management. Lack of local market development for recycled textiles. Most circular initiatives focuses on exporting recycled materials back to Europe rather than developing a local market for sustainable fashion within Bangladesh and neighboring countries. This leaves Bangladesh vulnerable to external market fluctuations and limit domestic economic opportunities, I would say. And many brands start pilot sustainability initiatives in Bangladesh, but do not commit to long-term partnership, making it difficult for factories to justify large investment in circularity. Without stable contracts, factories hesitate to upgrade technology or shift business models toward circular practices. So in this case, I would say that brands and the local factories mutually can be benefited by setting some strategies like creating a circular manufacturing hub in Bangladesh. Instead of just recycling textile waste for export, Bangladesh could become a leader in producing high-value recycled fashion products. The EU and brands could invest in turning Bangladesh into a hub for circular apparel, benefiting both local job creation and global sustainability goals. and also leveraging Bangladesh's strengths in upcycling and waste valorization. The country already has a thriving upcycling sector, but it's not all integrated into global supply chains. Brands could collaborate with local startups to create high-end upcycled fashion, reducing waste while adding economic value. Microfinancing and incentives for SMEs in circular economy is also important in Bangladesh. Most circular economy funding targets large factories, but small and medium enterprises, where they will go? They are driving much of Bangladesh textile sector. Microfinancing programs for smaller textile business could accelerate innovation in waste management and recycling. Skill development and job creation in circular textile. Instead of only focusing on reducing environmental impact, the transition to circular textile could create new job opportunities in repair, remanufacturing, and also material innovation. EU-funded training program could prepare workers, already has started, but still if it is continue gradually, programs could prepare workers for these emerging roles, ensuring a just transition for Bangladesh workforce. And very, very important, I would say at the end, that is brand and manufacturer co-investment models. Instead of factories bearing the full cost of transition to circularity, brands could co-invest in technology and infrastructure upgrade, ensuring both parties share risk and benefits. These would lead to a more stable supply chain with consistent quality and innovation in sustainable textile. It will bring huge confidence in both sides, I would say. That's all from my side.
Thank you so much to both. I think we just have 6 more minutes to this webinar. So I might ask you 2 very quick short questions, if you could answer just within 1 minute, and then I will close the session by giving a high-level recap of what was discussed just now. So maybe for you in the All Foundation, and also Solomon in the Municipal Authority, I just wanted to ask you if, in 1 minute you can share your ideas for how we can build back Cantonmanto better, and what you think are sort of, the key essential points here for building back the market better. And then finally, maybe for you, Abdur, it was very interesting to see from your perspective, where do you think the investments are needed? So maybe if you could just highlight one key opportunity and one key threat you see in the circular textile field for you in the near future. Thank you.
I'm happy to jump in here. Unfortunately, Engineer Noy had to step out for a call with city leadership. But the question you've asked is a good one, and it unfolds on multiple timeframes. Immediately, there is a crisis at hand of people needing to get back to work. When you're operating within a subsistence economy, particularly one that's fueled by debt, and you have folks coming for you to pay off loans that you've taken, it's very difficult to sit around saying, let's plan for the future. Rather, how am I going to pay bills, pay for food, pay for transportation today? So that is the current state of the market in its rebuild, is getting people back on their feet to get back to work as quickly as possible. At the same time, what we've been trying to give space for with market leadership, market members, who we've been working very closely with, as well as City Authority in the Ghana National Fire Service, are 2 medium and long-range term plans. So the medium-term plan looks at the immediate basic fire safety features, fire lanes, some shifts in building materials that can catalyze the longer range plan of really creating a completely re-envisioned market, one that's growing out of the vision, what's been identified by market members, the needs and basic necessities of, for instance, nurseries and health clinic, and better hygiene situations and sanitation situations, separated areas for food safety, something that can really be a world-class market as a flagship for a global reuse hub. something that I think in almost any other context would be kind of the standard operating procedure. But here, due to that lack of investment and due to the precariousness of the trade, as I discussed earlier, has been so difficult to make happen. I know that this moment there is a catalyst for change, but the challenge is how to move with that catalyst while also addressing the immediate pressures of the economic challenges people are facing on a day-to-day basis. So we are trying to do that by sending immediate direct relief to folks to sort of create a space in which there is an opportunity to have conversations in long-range planning at the same time as providing for immediate needs.
Thank you so much. And Abdur, if you could respond in just 1 minute.
Yeah, the two questions. Number one is investment opportunity, and number two is threat. For investment, I already said that there is a plenty of waste materials in Bangladesh, especially post-industrial waste. So we just need a proper recycling infrastructure and also bring a better technology to here so that we can do our own domestic recycling hub. So this is important to bring investment in this criteria. And another question was trade. The trade is like long-term contract, lack of long-term contract between buyer and seller. This is one kind of trade, I would say, because when an investor will invest, he needs a guarantee of product selling, or like this product will buy by the buyer. So they should the buyer should commit a long-term commitment that they will buy sustainable product continuously. Otherwise, the investor will not get enough confidence to move forward.
Thank you very much. Very clear. Well, thank you to both of you, and also to Solomon, who's now left, for joining us, and for everybody who joined this webinar for tuning in. As you saw, the first part, or the big focus of this research project was really to study what type of circular textile policies are currently being implemented, what is their scope, what is their range, and how do they impact partner trading countries, and how do they specifically impact workers and businesses inside these partner trading countries. And we focused on 2 countries, Bangladesh and Ghana. And now we really encourage you to have a look at these reports. We published, I think, 5 reports in total, a policy, an overview of circular textiles policies in Europe, which you'll find very insightful for giving you an overview of what these circular textile policies are. We did 2 baseline analysis on trade flows and employment in Ghana and Bangladesh. We also produced the trade scenarios, which I saw in the Q&A some of you were asking about. All the assumptions are detailed in the reports. And finally, we concluded with the impact analysis of the potential socioeconomic impacts on partner trading countries. So all in all, we really encourage you to have a look, read these papers. Of course, email us if you have any questions and thoughts. We'd love to hear your feedback. And that's it for now. We're incredibly happy that you joined us, and we hope to hear from you soon, maybe in the near future, another textile event. But thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.